What's up everybody, welcome to Risky Fitness and part 2 of the History of Ghostbusters video games. So before we dive in, I would like to thank Guru Larry for pointing out an error in my last video. The Sega Master System version of Ghostbusters was actually released a year before the NES, so that means the stairway and the driving sequences on the NES version were based on the Master System version and not the other way around. Thank you, Guru Larry. So an amended timeline, 1984 Commodore 64 and various computer ports, 1987 Master System, and 1988 Nintendo. But anyway, just like in the first video, we'll be talking about games based on or inspired by the original 1982 film and not the cartoon series, or the sequels, or the reboot. There will also be a part 3 of the History of Ghostbusters games, so please subscribe and enable notifications so you don't miss it. So last time we talked about the various versions of the 1984 Commodore 64 Activision Ghostbusters game, and today we're going to move on to the very popular 2009 game, which Dan Aykroyd and Ramis have both acknowledged as being, for all intents and purposes, Ghostbusters 3. But first I want to talk about a couple of oddities that you may not know about. In 1990, a side-scrolling hybrid platformer shooter based on the Ghostbusters was released for the Sega Genesis. Far removed from the business simulator that came before it, this game looks and feels a bit like some other movie tie-in games from this era like Home Alone or Wayne's World. This game was developed for Sega by the now defunct Compile, a Japanese game developer who you may recognize as the developer of Puyo Puyo, Aleste, and Blazing Lasers. I wasn't able to find a lot of info on the history or development of this game, but it got mostly praise from critics, being cited as a great shooter and one of the better movie tie-in games of its time, even though the game seems to have very little connection to the source material, apart from the character sprites, which, to be fair, do resemble their on-screen counterparts very well. I can't say I share the enthusiasm though. I played the game for a couple of hours in preparation for this video, and I got tired of it pretty quickly. The game's very difficult, and the maze-like levels can get tedious very quickly. There is a really cool intro sequence, and before and after each stage there are these great cutscenes in a comic book style, but the writing is really poor. The dialogue definitely does not sound anything like the Ghostbusters that I know. You can choose from the 3 original Ghostbusters, but no Winston. And you can complete the levels in any order while earning money, and you can use that money to purchase upgrades and take out food from a Chinese stereotype.
Thank you for representing the Asians, man.
The storyline revolves around a series of earthquakes, and as your chosen Ghostbuster, you unravel the story alone, with the main plot being fleshed out by the cutscenes. While the game mostly plays like a regular shooter, each stage has one or more middle ghosts, which you have to capture with the stream. Capture the Spectre spirit inside the middle ghost, and you will receive a large sum of money. This is certainly an interesting footnote in Ghostbusters video game history, but not one I would go out of my way to experience again. If you have the opportunity, maybe check it out. It's pretty interesting to see the character sprites, but the game is just not that good. It doesn't hold up. So here we come to the heart of today's episode, which is all about the 2009 smash hit Ghostbusters the video game. We're going in deep. So in order to help the channel grow, please watch this video all the way to the end. You'll really help me out. Thank you. Ghostbusters as a franchise went quiet after this for a long time, with virtually no new Ghostbusters media being released at all. Beginning around 1994, Dan Aykroyd would work on a script for a third Ghostbusters film, Ghostbusters Hellbent, in which the Ghostbusters would travel through a cross-dimensional gate to reach a version of Manhattan combined with Hell, called, obviously enough, Manhattan. This script would be riddled with problems, with Ivan Reitman saying the 1998 script was a disaster before several revisions were made. I think we can tell from the inclusion of a place called Manhattan that this was not a fantastic script. Bill Murray seemed to want nothing to do with it. He turned down the opportunity to be in the film, and he kind of went back and forth. He'll do it if it's a small part, he'll do it if it can be a ghost for most of the movie, and eventually he agreed to do a little bit of a movie. The film would feature a new team of Ghostbusters being initiated, kind of like a passing of the torch. The original Ghostbusters, of course, would act as guides for the new team, so kind of like a Batman Beyond scenario. As of the late 90s, it seemed like the film was definitely going to happen. Considered for roles of new Ghostbusters at various times throughout the development were Chris Farley, Will Smith, Ben Stiller, Jason Alexander, Jeff Daniels, and Chris Rock, with Alec Baldwin for the villain. By July of 1999, it was looking like the movie was absolutely going to go ahead. But in November of '99, Aykroyd would reveal that it was unlikely due to Sony spending too much money on the Blair Witch Project. This went from bad to worse when Ivan Reitman told the Calgary Sun that he couldn't solve the script problems, and there were issues working with Sony and with the cast. The project seemed to be dead in the water, and the only new Ghostbusters media we saw was a 2005 mobile phone game. This was prior to the mainstream prevalence of smartphones, so this was like a flip phone game. It looks a little bit like a puzzle game. It's really hard to say, and I didn't play it at the time, so I'm not really too sure exactly what was going on there. In a 2007 interview, Aykroyd would state that he had been looking into making a CG movie based on the script. I think that may have been where the seeds of a video game were planted. If they're doing CG, why not take that extra mile into one of the fastest growing industries of the time? In 2008, Vivendi released another mobile game called Ghostbusters Ghost Trap, in which the player would slam dunk ghosts into traps. It was around this time that IDW Publishing would begin publishing one-offs and miniseries based on the Ghostbusters films, presenting the first Ghostbusters media in a very long time. So this brings us to 2009, when Ghostbusters, the video game, would arguably revive interest in the series and bring to life the third Ghostbusters film that Aykroyd never got off the ground. Well, kind of. Obviously there was no Van Helton, but some elements of Aykroyd's original idea were used in the game. For example, the training of a new Ghostbuster in the form of a new recruit who was used as a self-insertion avatar for the player, and of course travel into another dimension. I'm sure we're all familiar with the version that was released for the PS3, Xbox 360, and PC, but there were also some changes made to get the game onto other platforms, including the Nintendo Wii, the PlayStation 2, and the Nintendo DS. These other versions have a distinctive visual style, although they're based on the same template as the mainstream release. But it's a very different art style, as you'll see. If you're still with me, please like this video and subscribe, and if you like this kind of deep dive, this documentary style video, be sure to enable notifications. I make these videos as a hobby in my spare time. I'm a dad with a full-time job, and I put a lot of time and effort into these videos, so please show your support by leaving a comment below. The 2009 game was developed by Terminal Reality, with the ports to the older and less powerful consoles outsourced to third parties. Three-Wave Software developed the game's multiplayer mode. While the script is credited to Terminal Reality, Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis co-wrote the script. In addition to this, an all-star cast voiced and added their likenesses to the game, including the original Ghostbusters, and even William Atherton returned as Walter Peck. Brian Doyle Murray and Alyssa Milano joined the cast as the mayor and Dr. Alyssa Selwyn, respectively, and development of a Ghostbusters game began around 2005. An early game was this kind of Resident Evil-style horror game, in which the player tracked Slimer through the Sedgwick. This early build was abandoned in favor of a game that would have more action. Contrary to popular belief, the Zootlfy prototype that emerged on YouTube around 2007 was not an early build of this game, but rather an attempt to get Sony's attention to allow Zootlfy to develop a Ghostbusters game. Zootlfy was most likely not aware of the Terminal Reality game that was in progress. The development was kind of kept under wraps, at least according to some sources. There does seem to be some noise on the internet there about this. Some sources have claimed that Vivendi used that Zootlfy demo to pitch the idea to Sony, which would mean that that 2005 demo would be unrelated to the eventual product that came out. So I don't know, what do you think? Do you think that Vivendi did use that Zootlfy demo to sort of pitch the idea? Or do you think they already had something in progress and the Zootlfy demo was kind of a weird coincidence? Let me know in the comments. So Bill Murray remained uncommitted to his role in the game. He recorded most of the lines that he was sent. Ultimately, Terminal Reality was able to get enough out of him to include him in the game. He would be quoted later as saying that he wasn't really interested in being involved with future Ghostbusters projects because he thought it was ridiculous to have a bunch of old men running around chasing ghosts. For my part, that seems like a flimsy excuse to me. I think Bill Murray probably had other reasons for not wanting to do it. Rick Moranis also declined being in the movie. He stopped acting back in 1997 after his wife passed on. He wanted to focus on raising his children, and it's fantastic he was able to do that, made enough money as an actor, saved his money, and was able to take care of his family. He's been quoted as saying that he's not totally retired from acting, he's just really selective about what roles he's going to choose. Sigourney Weaver, she also declined, but after she learned that Murray was going to do it, she wanted to get involved. So as 2009 quickly approached, Activision acquired Vivendi Universal and announced that they would not be publishing Ghostbusters. which caused some fans and journalists to be concerned that the game had been cancelled. But Atari purchased the publishing rights, and a few months later they released the game. They did that to line up, of course, with the 25th anniversary of the film. And now, when I saw the Atari logo on this game back in 2009, I was really surprised about that. But yeah, there is still a company out there who's doing business as Atari, but that's a story for another time. So development of the game cost between $15 and $20 million. Probably not like mega blockbuster money, but definitely Hollywood money. And that included the development of an AI engine that would be used for a Thanksgiving Day parade, which eventually didn't make it into the game. The Infernal engine, as well, was used for this game, which was developed by Terminal Reality for this game, and the Infernal engine is what makes it possible to have the proton stream moving in real time, so that's a pretty cool little factoid there as well. The main reason the Thanksgiving Day parade was never finished is that there wasn't enough time to polish the level, and they figured that time and those resources would be better used to finish up the rest of the game. The end result is an experience worthy of the name Ghostbusters, in which the player controls a new recruit who accompanies the original Ghostbusters on an all-new original story with tons of callbacks to the original movie, including visits to the New York Public Library, the Cedric Hotel, and other various locales you may recognize. There's also an expansion of the in-universe Ghostbusters lore that goes deeper into the mythos of the Ghostbusters universe, including the background of the Grey Lady and other characters. All of the extended lore is written by Aykroyd and Ramis and can be considered canon, although I think some of the events of the game may be retconned now because of Ghostbusters Afterlife. Be warned, there are going to be spoilers ahead. Now, this story takes place in 1991, 2 years after Ghostbusters 2, and it revisits the Gozer phenomenon, starting with its exhibit at the Museum of Natural History and revolving around researching Dr. Elissa Selwyn. As the Ghostbusters try to find the source of the supernatural disturbances in the city, they visit the hotel, the library, a museum, Shandor's Island, a cemetery, and even the Ghost World. A nod to Aykroyd's Hellbent plot, the Ghost World is threatening to eclipse the real world, creating a hell on Earth. Eventually, the Ghostbusters track down the source of the disturbances, and they come face to face with Shandor himself, battling not only against the ghosts, but also Walter Peck, and the new mayor, who turns out to be a host for Shandor, and of course they rescue Dr. Selwyn from becoming a new vessel for Gozer. Shandor seizes Gozer's power and gives the Ghostbusters and their new recruit a true endgame boss. It's a story that makes perfect sense within the context of the Ghostbusters universe, and this is reinforced by the gameplay. When the game begins, the player learns how to use the capture stream and trap along with the rookie, and as the player progresses through the game, the rookie will test new Ghostbusters equipment, including a slime tether, stasis ray, and a Nissan collider. The enemies you'll encounter along the way have different weaknesses, so you'll have to choose the right tool for the job. Additionally, the tools can be used to solve various puzzles. The PKE meter can be used to track ghosts and also find mysterious artifacts that will give the player money to spend on equipment upgrades. The feel of the stream and trap is perfect and is exactly what you would expect being a Ghostbuster to feel like. Proton Pack can overheat if not vented, which gives the feeling of reloading in a shooting game. Other weapons make the game feel more and more like a run-and-gun shooter, with the other Ghostbusters helping the player like a squad. The HUD is on the Proton Pack, which makes for a very clean UI, and just like in most squad shooters, the player must revive fallen comrades and can also be revived by the AI Ghostbusters. This can be difficult when the team splits up, since the AI doesn't always have your back in quite the way you would like, and this can result in a wipe where all the Ghostbusters are disabled, and thus the game ends. One criticism that I do have of the gameplay is that the AI doesn't seem to try to keep the Ghostbusters together or focus on a single enemy. So it gets really chaotic, the team runs all over the place, sometimes they just run straight into danger. There's also very little cover, so it's kind of hard to protect yourself from enemy attacks. The only defense you have is a dodge, but there's a big long pause before the Ghostbuster actually moves, and the player takes this huge leap that leaves you vulnerable for several seconds. There's one part in particular where it's just the player and Ray, and they're fighting the mini marshmallows in the drafting room of the office, and it's a cluster, and it's really difficult to get through in one piece. It took me a lot of tries. So the original PS3 and Xbox 360 release, they also featured a multiplayer mode, where you can go online and visit various locales from the game to complete challenges along with other players. It's missing from the remastered version, and I never experienced it myself, but I'm told it was a lot of fun. Have you played that multiplayer mode? What did you think of it? Let me know in the comments what you thought of the multiplayer mode in Ghostbusters and if you'd want to see it come back. Handheld enthusiasts, and those who didn't move on to the 7th console generation, were in luck here, because a stylized version of the game was released for the PS2, PSP, and Nintendo DS. These versions follow the plot and gameplay of the main version, but they have completely different graphics and some other changes. In addition to this version was released on the Wii, and the Wiimote is used for the controls. You can actually use the Wiimote to control the plasma stream. The Wii version even included local multiplayer. Development of these was farmed out to third parties, and they did a pretty impressive job. Redfly Studios handled the PlayStation 2, PSP, and Wii version. These versions contain an almost shot-for-shot remake of all the sequences in the original game, but in a unique cartoon style. You can choose between a male or female Ghostbuster, which is kinda fun, and the voices are almost exactly the same as the original, and the areas are a little bit different, and the gameplay includes several changes. The most noticeable thing was that the PKE meter works completely differently. You actually just see it in the hand of the Ghostbuster, you don't have the ecto goggles. And of course the pack is not vented quite the same way. Instead, you can only use it for so long before it just can't be used for a few seconds. It can only vent itself, basically. The controls are a little bit different, and instead of the haunted artifacts, there are collectibles that are pages from Tobin's Spirit Guide, and you can't complete the collection of the pages from Tobin's Spirit Guide unless you scan the ghost. On top of that, the HUD appears on screen instead of on the pack, obvious reasons, not having quite as much surface area on the pack, they couldn't fit as much information on it. If they jammed it on there, you probably wouldn't be able to see it very well. So the PSP and PS2 versions are almost identical. The PSP only having one analog stick has much more awkward controls. Very, very different. The PSP version also has a much lower frame rate and resolution, so it doesn't look as good as the PS2 version. The DS version is the standout, unique version of the game. That was developed by Zen Studios, which I think you might have actually heard of. I'd never heard of any of these other third-party developers before, but Zen I've heard of. And this version contains adventure and RPG elements, which is kind of cool. A lot of people even consider this to be an indirect sequel or like a spiritual successor to the 1984 game. The graphics are super downgraded from the other versions, as you might expect, and the dialogue appears in text only, there's no recorded voice here. Obviously, those DS games didn't have the kind of storage that a disc media has, or of course, for that matter, being installed to a hard drive. And the story's also changed quite a lot, with the cutscenes removed completely and events changed to make sense on a much more limited platform. The gameplay is totally different. You'll play as the Ghostbusters instead of the new recruit, and the team receives new missions as the game progresses. You can drive from the firehouse to the scene of the mission, trying to avoid collisions, and as the Ecto-1 takes damage, it'll become more and more expensive to fix it up at the body shop. Once you arrive at your destination, you'll play a top-down action game where the objectives will be assigned one by one as you play. It feels a lot like Diablo or kind of other games like that. You actually have like health potions you have to use, and the proton beam and trap are controlled with the touchscreen. You can also switch Ghostbusters. You can order them to hold position or follow you, and you can use special abilities unique to each Ghostbuster to complete specific objectives. When a mission is complete, you receive money and return to the firehouse where you can upgrade equipment and even your Ghostbusters. So it isn't without its charm, but it definitely didn't hold my attention like the other Ghostbusters games did. I could see it being something that would be fun to play if you're on like a long trip, if you're away from home and don't have access to a console or computer and you've got some downtime. I could see it being something that could be enjoyable. I could scratch that Ghostbusters itch for sure. So now that you've learned all about Ghostbusters the video game, you're probably wondering what has happened in the last 13 years. So apart from the remaster, which came out in 2019, quite a lot really. There have been a lot of Ghostbusters games on all kinds of platforms. There hasn't been a dedicated like AAA console release, but there's been a lot of odds and ends. So tune in next week, I'm going to go over the last 13 years of Ghostbusters games, and you might be surprised about some of the interesting and unique Ghostbusters games that there have been. Until next time, game over.